G'day, Greg Anderson, and welcome to this interview.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Jack.
Greg, you're originally from Victoria. Whereabouts?
In a place called West Footscray, which when I was a kid born, it was basically all paddocks, so we had horses, and that's how I got involved in horses from the day I could walk, really. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Different place now, of course.
Now, Greg, you were born into a family of entertainers. Your dad, Ron Anderson, was a whip-cracking champion.
Yep.
And he toured outside of Australia as well. But your mother also entertained. What did she do?
Well, no, Dad and Mum had the whip cracking act together.
Oh, okay.
With my father's sister.
Oh, okay.
And so they toured Europe, and basically that's how I started with them when they went across to England, and I was only 15 months old, and basically the media, the newspapers picked it up, and there's shots of me cracking the whip still in my diapers and dummy, and we actually did a reenactment of that for Women's Day last year with my now grandson that's 3 years old, and we reproduced the shot of me cutting the cigarette out of my father's mouth and him doing it out of my mouth. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it all began.
Now that brings me to the next thing.
Right.
Now I don't know much about whip cracking.
Right.
But I do know it takes a lot of skill. But 15-month old.
Yeah.
Now,
well, you know, if you're naturally inclined, it's not a big deal. In fact, I taught my grandson to do it in a week.
Oh, okay.
And he had a natural inclination to want to do it. I had the whip on the front decking of our home here, and he would just pick it up and come out onto the driveway and start cracking it. So I just worked with him, and within a week he was literally able to cut straw or a streamer out of my mouth. Wow. And of course, I then worked, going back to myself, I then worked with my mum and dad when I started performing with them when I was sort of 6 to 10 years of age. Then I started performing on my own, and I had a regular TV gig with Channel 9 called The Tarek Show, and then I was singing more than just doing the whip cracking and combined them together with Coca-Cola. I went from Tarek's to Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola sponsored my own show around the Victorian town halls. Okay. And so we did the whole thing with the singing and the whip cracking and the whole bit. Yeah.
And were there any inspirations regarding singing?
Oh yeah, I have a lot. I mean, going way back, of course. You know, being the Rhinestone Cowboy, Glenn Campbell was a big influence. Willie Nelson, the Gatlin brothers. Going even further back than that, Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash and people like that. So it was very broad. My influences went from pure country and western right through to what's called country rock pop, and then later on into the Eagles and Neil Diamond and all that sort of thing. So it broadened, very broad. In fact, my 2-hour production show covers all the gamuts right through to traditional country to pop country, you know.
Oh, okay. Now, I just looked in the old newspaper of the Argus.
Oh yeah.
Melbourne, yeah. And there you are, 5 years old.
Mm.
Cutting the cigarette or something out of your mother's mouth.
Yeah, that'd be right, yeah. Yeah.
Now, were there any time with whip cracking that you misjudged?
Probably the worst one was when I was about 8 or 9, yes. And I don't know if you remember what the Wyatt Earp TV show?
No.
Well, Wyatt Earp was probably the #1 TV show in Australia of the Western vein. It was a half-hour show starring Hugh O'Brien. And he came out to Australia, and we performed in the show with him. My dad was responsible for getting all the actors and the stuntmen together for it. And I would come on stage towards the end of my mum and dad's act, yep. and they would kneel down, and I would cut the cigarette from between the both of them. And one night I just went completely off, and I would hit my father right across the nose.
Oh.
And this went on for several nights. And he wondered whether I might have had something against him, you know. So he said, "Oh well, let's try. First of all, we'll switch places. I'll go on the other side." And it was my auntie was actually doing it at that time, and of course then I hit her. Oh. And this went on. So we sort of did a retraining program and worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and then it disappeared. And of course at the same time I then learnt how to crack the whip without actually hurting someone. I literally opened him up. He
okay.
had the marks on his nose, and so then I learned how to crack the whip. without, and I can literally hit people now with the whip without hurting them. So that was a big learning curve for him as well as me.
Yes, I can just imagine.
Yeah.
Now, another interesting fact, well, once again, you're 5 years of age
Yeah.
on the Spike Jones show.
Yeah, well, I think that was at the Festival Hall in Melbourne.
Yep.
I don't remember a lot about that, only
Oh.
from the press clippings after it, and running around backstage. But as far as the actual interaction or anything, I don't recall anything about that.
You don't?
No.
You also did rodeos.
Yeah, well, my father used to compete in rodeos, and then he moved on to judging rodeos, so the whole family would go. We would travel Victoria in school holidays mainly, and I started calf roping on my Palomino pony called Topaz, and calf riding and things like that. And we would go to Myrtleford Rodeo every year, Lang Lang, Colac, all those regional towns. And one year I actually got in the top 10 roping with my horse, and that was when I was probably about 15, and I think I was the youngest roper in Australia at the time. It's changed a lot now. Kids start so much younger, but I used to practice every day after school because we had acreage next to the home, and it was a real passion, So now I'm into cutting. So we just recently bought a stallion back from America just before Christmas. He's on the Catici line, which is the #1 cutting bred horse in America.
Yep.
So we brought him back here, and we're breeding him to our own mares here as well. And when we got him back, he only got off the plane, and we took him up to Yugelbar, which is the Meyer family's property for the first ranch cutting in Australia.
Okay.
And it was amazing, on 300,000 acres.
Wow.
And cutting is normally done in an arena, and ranch cutting is where you do it in the wide open spaces. In this case, it was on a riverbank, and it was just unbelievable. This beautiful riverbank with there was about 30 of us cutting with 200 head of cattle, and each morning we'd bring them down from the hills, settle them down, and then cut. So that was his introduction to Australia, which was quite phenomenal, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever receive any accolades for whip cracking?
Oh, I got plenty of accolades. I don't know that I was in any area to sort of compete or anything like that, because all my whip cracking was done within my show.
Oh.
I was never a contestant in anything whatsoever. I mean, my father was awarded because he would do it at rodeos and competitions and things, and he was regarded as probably one of the best in the world. But mine purely went straight into entertaining, and that's really all I've done. I mean, my whole life has been entertaining, apart from when my wife and I, Linda, brought the property here when we moved to Sydney, and started breeding quarter horses.
Yep.
Because that's really how I started using the horse in my show. The movie The Electric Horseman came out. They asked me if I'd promote it, and I just brought up a Nug Nug. His name was Nug Nug Butch Cassidy. I bought him from Nug Nug Ranch in Victoria, Myrtleford, to breed, and so we put a saddle on him. They made the electric suit for me, and we went into Cinema International in the theatres, and the reaction was so incredible that within a month he was incorporated into my stage show, and then we won Production Show of the Year several times,
Wow.
Country Entertainer of the Year several times, and that really all just morphed into and the 2-hour production show, and that was really what led me to going to America as well, because I'd won Entertainer of the Year here, or Variety Showman of the Year for the International Variety Club, and they invited me to go to Disney World for one show, which was to celebrate Arnold Palmer's Humanitarian Award, the champion golfer.
Yep.
And Qantas flew us over there with the idea of doing the one show, then coming back home. But the reaction was so incredible. The boss of Disney, Bob Matheson, who was Walt Disney's right-hand man and still running the show,
Yep.
he, a funny side story, Jackie Trent and Tony Hatch were running the show. The two of us will always be together,
Oh, yeah.
great song.
Yep.
Well, Tony Hatch was organising it all, and he actually was responsible for inviting me over. And we arrived, the horse just flew in, he was jet lagged, he was standing around with his head on my shoulder, he was so tired, and we went into rehearsal, and as soon as we walked into the ballroom, everyone came out of the woodwork. What are you doing here with a horse? And Tony Hatch said, well, this is the electric horseman. And they said, we thought it was an electric horse. You can't do this show here. And they said, well, he's just flown from Australia. We've got to work out something. And so they called Bob Matheson down from his office to watch me rehearse. And they were very dubious about this. And anyway, long story short, they watched the rehearsal. And he came up to me and everyone else up. He said, look, let him do whatever he wants. He obviously knows. We've never seen anything like this since Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. And we did the show. The show went great. He invited me up to his office, and he introduced us to people in Nashville, LA, and long story short, that's how we came to go to America, because the Dolly Parton's people heard about the show, invited me down to do one show at Dollywood's Dixie Stampede in Sphereville, Pigeon Forge, and they signed me to open her new theatre in Branson, Missouri that night. They were so keen, because they said opening a brand new show, it had to be so different and spectacular, and so they purposely built what's called the Carriage Room Theatre for me, which is like a 1,000-seater theatre.
Yep.
And when I arrived in Branson, they were still building it, and the show started that week. That's how far behind they were, but that's what began. I only signed a year contract with them.
Yep.
I opened the theatre with Dolly, and the reaction went right around the world. And literally, they signed me. They wanted to sign me for 5 years straight away, and I wasn't prepared to do that. So we just kept signing for 1 year, and 10 years later, we'd moved from Branson to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and her theatre there, and then we went back down, oddly enough, back down to Orlando, Florida, and opened her $40 million theatre in Orlando. So it all came. I would never have in my life dreamed that I would be going from Australia purportedly to do one show and ending up in Branson, Missouri, and effectively we've been in America now for 15 years.
Oh, okay.
We come backwards and forwards, of course.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
Appeared on the pop circuit, a TV pop show, Commotion.
Yeah, well, actually, yes, Commotion. A guy called Ivan Damon, who managed Normie Rowe.
Oh, okay.
And he ran Cloudland Ballroom in Brisbane, Queensland. And I did shows for him. In fact, I did all the shows with the likes of John Farnham, Normie Rowe. The list goes on and on and on. Anyway,
Yeah.
So he decided to start his own record label called Commotion, and a TV show. And my first record came out on Commotion.
That's it.
We did a couple of singles with them, I Feel Good and When It's All Over, and a couple of others. And then, of course, after that, Festival Records signed me to do my own album, self-titled album, and we released the song that I wrote for the film called No Roses for Michael, which was the breaking ground of documentaries in Australia at the time. It won so many awards, and No Roses for Michael sort of went into the top 10 around Australia, and that moved me in another direction again for a while.
Can you tell us a little bit about No Roses for Michael?
Yeah, well, it was a true story based on the life of a young guy who actually lived on the Central Coast.
Yep.
And they shot the film, which was a dramatised documentary.
Yep.
And the organiser of the film asked me to watch the film, have a look at the film with the idea of writing the theme song for it. And I was so affected by it that I literally wrote the song in about an hour.
Oh, okay.
It just poured out. Within a week we had it recorded and released. And so it basically followed the deterioration of this young guy who became addicted to drugs and eventually died of an overdose of morphine.
Yeah.
And the song basically tells that story from go to O as well. Yeah.
No, it is a nice song. I have heard it.
Yeah, right. I still get people, even today, asking me for copies of it.
Oh, okay.
And particularly the age group at the time that were going through school, as I was still at school, and just coming out of school, and what effect it had on them and stopped them from getting into drugs. And even to the point, I remember particularly in Melbourne when I was performing at the Palais in St Kilda, and there was a bit of a scare for a while because the drug pushers didn't like it at all, and we had a few threats and things going on about shut up.
I can just imagine.
but it never really came home. I sort of felt a little sort of gung-ho about it, so I don't know whether it could have ever eventuated, but that was a period there.
It was the sign of the times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the ironical thing about it, and this is now we have ice, right?
Oh,
and,
yes.
and it's become so prevalent and such a major problem to particularly for kids in Australia. Well, drugs were just emerging in Australia, and at the time the guy that put this whole program together had a full educational kit that the Australian government was going to introduce into schools to teach kids about the emerging problems of drugs, and it was just ready to be released. The whole thing, the government were backing it, and at the last minute they came out and said, oh look, we've decided against it because we don't really have a drug problem in Australia and never will have. And look where we went from there and to now.
Today, yeah.
That's right. So if they'd done that, it may or may not have, sort of headed it off at the at the pass, as they say.
No, true, yeah. And it was around about, I think, November 1969, you married your wife Linda.
That's right, in Melbourne.
Yep. Who's also an entertainer.
Well, she was an actress primarily, and we met in Mount Gambier, Victoria, doing a charity show for the Paraplegics organisation. Yep. I'd never come across her before. Obviously, I'd probably seen her in TV series like The Terrible 10, but never come across her. And the ironical part about it was, she was working in exactly the next door studio as me when I was doing the Tarek show. Yep. She was shooting Terrible 10 at Channel 9, Richmond, in the studio next door. And I would arrive just after school, go in and do it, and never really came across them. So we were both doing this charity, and oddly enough, there was her, a couple of girlfriends with with Linda's mum and dad, and I got on really well with them, and they said, oh look, it's Linda's birthday next week, would you like to come to her birthday? Well, I literally fell head over heels for her anyway. Not that I'd let her know that, but and she was the other way. She was played real hard to get. And we were all going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go for a walk, the whole team of people, and she was the only one that didn't, because Anyway, long story short, we went to Mario's for her birthday, and that was it. Where it was just both of us. We did love at real first sight, and we got married. Well, we weren't allowed to get married until we were 20, so we got married the next week. And pretty much straight after that, we moved to Sydney because I was managed by NLT, Bobby Lim and Jack Neary up here. So, and Linda was also got managed by them as well. Oh, okay. And she was then she would travel backwards and forwards, and she was shooting the TV series Bellbird on Channel 2, which is the longest running TV series in Australia. If not still now. And then she moved on to things like The Box and Number 96 and guest roles in Matlock, all the police shows and things like that.
Excellent.
And so she had a real good long career there until we obviously had kids. We've got 3 daughters now, blonde, brunette and a redhead. And the youngest one lives in LA, Brooke, and she's in film. She's a writer, producer, actress, and she was in E Street when she was sort of 8 years old. I think she started that. Yeah.
Well, entertainment in the family.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And I believe after your marriage, or a few months after your marriage, you and Linda appeared in the Expo in Japan.
In Japan, that's right. Expo 70, that's right. And that was a big event, and it almost didn't happen because when we arrived, they had massive storms, and they had giant screens for projection, and they all blew away. Oh. But it was a phenomenal event. It was televised to something like 80 countries around the world. Wow! And that was a real experience. Yeah.
Greg, in 1976, Linda and yourself established an entertainment agency.
Well, it was actually more than just an agency. It was the largest talent studios in Australia. Oh, okay. It started off very small. Yep. Because Linda's parents had stage show theatres in London. Linda's originally from London, and they emigrated when she was 10.
Yep.
And so Linda always wanted to open one in Australia. There was nothing like it in Australia. So we originally opened it in the city in Elizabeth Street,
Yep.
and gradually went to larger and larger studios. Then we finally bought our own studio, which was, I don't know if you know, it's city centre now, the Grace Brothers store, just up at City Road in Glebe, and it was. In fact, it's right next door to the Church of Scientology in Glebe Point Road, yeah. So they were our neighbours, and we bought this building which was like 15,000 square feet, and it was just run down. It was owned by Fairfax, who used it purely to park their cars on the ground floor.
Yep.
And we designed this concept of building these studios and put in a mezzanine floor, which we did. We spent a year literally almost living there and built like 15 studios,
Wow.
recording studios, everything. It was just a phenomenal setup. And so King Kids Studios were probably the #1 studios in the country, and with that we opened the management and agency, and we trained and represented all of our own talent, all the kids. We had people people in all the major TV shows, Home and Away, E Street of course,
Yep.
and then a number of them went on. Tony Perrin went on to a recording career, and she had #1 hits right around Australia, and she was in our group called the King Kids, and it all started from there. You know?
It must have made you and your wife proud to see these young artists.
Absolutely, and you don't realise it at the time, but without exception, we took the kids to America in International Year of the Child to New York.
Yep.
To raise funds for that. So we took 12 kids over there, just Linda and myself.
Wow.
And at the time we didn't think anything of. When we look now, it makes us shiver because what could or couldn't happen. But it just went phenomenally well, and they performed at Studio. Was it 52? I forget the names of it now. The big disco place that was over there at the time, plus in a number of charity shows, and to every single one of the kids and even students after that say that the best time in their life was when they were at the studios, because it was like a giant family, they would send their kids to us, and
Wow.
it wasn't until we went to America that we hung on for a few years. Our eldest daughter ran it for us, but it became just too difficult to run it to the extent that we had it. So we sold the building probably in about 1992, I think it was, because we'd gone over to America.
Yep.
And it was just too much coming backwards, because we would show there for 40 weeks of the year, come back here and show Christmas through to March, and it was just draining. In fact, when I first stopped performing at Dixie Stampede Dolly's Theatres, when I came home to Australia, I would get up at like 2 o'clock in the morning and run around the room wondering where I should be, because I did 4,000 shows over there.
Wow.
And that's just me and one horse, So he never missed a show either, which is quite phenomenal,
My oath.
Yeah.
On April 9th, 1978,
Yeah.
you appeared on Sydney Opera House with the Slim Dusty Show.
That's right. Yes, exactly.
Now, which also included another Aussie legend, Chad Morgan.
Yep.
What was that show like?
Oh, that was like homecoming in a lot of regards, because as a kid growing up, I went to the rodeos where Chad and Slim Dusty were performing in the tent shows.
Oh, okay.
So I was brought up around that environment as a kid anyway. And then I toured with Slim around New South Wales briefly, and there was a lot of acts on that show. Yeah, so it was a great show actually. It's a beautiful place to perform. I performed there probably about three or four times, and the King Kids have performed there as well with the Royal Command performances. We performed there, and I did a Royal Command performance there as well for I think it was the Duchess of York, or one of the others. Yeah.
But on that Slim Dusty show, you didn't have the horse then?
No, this was before that. I used him in special shows, like when I did conventions, just to ride in, and that was just as a wow factor. But as far as singing and riding on the horse, in fact, that's the other reason that it really never came to my mind, is we didn't have radio mics in Australia at that time. So you couldn't ride a horse and gallop down the aisles with a long lead.
Long
you know?
lead.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the first radio mic I got off Lucky Star, because he brought one in from America and he really didn't like using it, so I bought it off him, and that was the introduction to radio mics. Yeah, yeah. When I finished with Dolly, I was almost burnt out, because after 4,000 shows I needed a break, and so my youngest daughter lives in LA. My wife would always wanted to live that side closer. It's easy to get back to Australia as well. So we'd always wanted to go to Vegas.
Yep.
I was asked to perform in Vegas, and again the Variety Club. We went to. I did several shows there at the Mirage, the Paris, and oddly enough, that's really what decided us to stay there, and mainly start doing conventions.
Yep.
With the idea of introducing my full production, a combination of Australian and American music, and that's what we were aiming towards in that regard, you know. Yeah.
And regarding your productions,
Yeah.
The Man from Snowy River,
Yeah.
and also our greatest bushranger, Ned Kelly.
Yeah. Well, the Man from Snowy River is really not mine. I had my production show was Greg Anderson's Australia's Spectacular.
Yep.
But Ned Kelly, I wrote the song Ned Kelly. Yep. I originally wrote that for Expo in Japan.
Oh, okay.
And then when we started doing the production shows, my youngest brother Brett is a cinematographer.
Yep.
in Victoria, and my other brother Lance was a stuntman. So we decided to make a video clip of it, and we went down into the New England Ranges where Ned Kelly was actually, around. I'm related to Ned Kelly too through my mother.
Wow.
Yeah, so that all sort of joined together, you know. And so we spent a day and shot the clip, and it was phenomenal. So I used that in my show as well as a montage behind singing the song. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also on my my album, you know.
No, what would be your the highlight of your career so far?
Well, I hope it hasn't happened yet. Look, there is not one single thing that comes to my mind. There's a number of things that are different for different reasons. You know, things that come back to you as the bicentenary at the River Stage in Brisbane, yep. Which I also went back 20 years later and redid for them, and that was, in fact, it was memorable, but for a number of reasons that it was on a river stage, and the stage was like 4 or 5 meters off the water level.
Yeah,
and there was a magician on before me, but nobody told me that he'd spilt water all over the stage, and so they built me a run from the bank all the way onto the stage, and I literally galloped, and when I hit the spot to stop him and rear him up and spin him around, yeah. He nearly fell over. In fact, when I saw it back on TV, how he didn't fall over was astounding. I was spinning him like this, and he went down, and his front legs split like this.
Oh, okay.
And then he tipped over sideways, and his nose literally hit the ground, and we were just about to drop off the front of the stage into the water. Wow. And he picked himself up, and we went on, literally didn't miss anything of a beat, and kept singing the song, Rhinestone Cowboy at the time. So that sort of thing. The things that you remember a lot are mostly things that go haywire, you know. When I ride all through the people singing, and my horse once took a guy's toupee off because he thought it was straw. So, things like that. The first time we had to take him into lifts and elevators and things like that are quite phenomenal at the Hilton Hotel. The horse that we took to America, because Butch Cassidy, the first horse I used, we were ready for a big show at the entertainment centre for 2,500 Japanese, and on that day he kicked out at one of his colts and broke his pedal bone.
Oh, okay.
And I came out to call him to get him ready for the show, and he was way down the bottom of the property and he wouldn't come up. and I clapped my hand, and he finally came up limp, 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 limp. So we had to use the colt that night in front of.
Oh.
And the Japanese are really hard because they won't stay in their seats. They want to stand up
And take photos.
Yeah, and we had this massive aisle at the entertainment centre that I'd gallop along, and of course the minute I started galloping, they all jumped out of their seats into the middle of the aisle with their cameras, thinking that they were sort of like 30 or 40 feet away from me and they were safe. But he's travelling at 40 miles an hour, you know. So, but he that was his first show, and he didn't miss a beat. And then he went on to, we took him straight to Queensland to open a new club up there, and he did 14 shows in the week. And it wasn't long after that that we took him to America, you know. So.
And are there any shows coming up in Australia?
Not at the moment. I had, unfortunately, just before Christmas, I had an accident. I'd just come back from doing the show up at Bar, and we were bringing in some sand to the arena, and I was standing up on a 3-metre tree, chopping off the branches to get the truck under the tree.
Oh.
And I jumped off the tree, thinking it would be all right to land, and I bent my knee backwards, and long story short, I'd always had problems with my right knee from when a steer fell on it, you know, when I was in my 20s or something, and went and had it x-rayed and found out there was just bone on bone.
Oh.
So I had to have a knee replacement operation.
Yep. And
then 8 weeks of physio, and literally just getting back on the horse now. So I used that time to sort of as almost a hiatus and working on the property and getting ready to go back to America. So it'll be interesting to see. I've started riding again about a week and a half ago.
Oh, okay.
And it's so far so good.
Excellent.
But yeah, it's still a slight limp occasionally, you know, because it usually takes probably about 6 or 8 months for it to really come good. Yeah. My wife particularly, and myself, we've got 2 young grandsons now, and Linda doesn't want to be away from them too long, so we're switching our plans to be back here more than over there, and we'll just see how it goes. It's sometimes easier said than done. I remember Olivia Newton-John years ago planning to do the same thing, and she's a mega star, and she found it too difficult to be able to juggle backwards and forwards. I mean, even Keith Urban and Nicole, they're doing it more and more to an extent. And I think what happens when you've got kids and grandkids is it's not so conducive in the States. It's really tough on kids and families. So this seems to be the way to go. So we'll see what happens.
And I honestly believe it's great that the Anderson legacy is going on to your next generation.
Sure, yeah. Oh, well, certainly certainly the grandkids, I think they're destined to be entertainers, although, you know, I'd be just as happy if they were turned out. I was going to be a vet as a kid myself, and they love the horses as well, or a nuclear physicist or something like that. But, you know, time will only tell. So they haven't even started school yet, and I think the first few years at school will sort of indicate which way they're leaning. But that's really for them to decide, you know.
True, and Greg, you have released 2 CD. Oh, well,
Yep.
Currently.
Yes.
City Cowboy and Christmas for Cowboys.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered, or is there a DVD of your performance?
No, but we have been working towards that, as a matter of fact. We actually shot the entire end concert at Dolly's Theatre with multi-cameras. We've just never edited it together yet, so we're looking at that. We're also looking at probably re-releasing, because we never formally released either of those in Australia. Only we recorded them in America, and only released them in America. We're looking at maybe releasing the Christmas one this forthcoming Christmas. So we're looking at that, and probably doing a film clip with that as well. So that's the sort of thing that we're working on at the moment, and then making that as the launch, let everybody know that we're going to spend more time back home here.